All right, we're going to get started. It's great to see you guys. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Chantel Wilkinson. I've been working on this campaign, the Opportunity Starts at Home campaign, for 5 years now. We launched in 2018. And since then, we've been doing this work of expanding this multi-sector affordable housing movement, which means that we're bringing in different voices into the housing movement, really looking across the other sectors, whether it's education or health or racial equity or economic mobility, those other sectors, and breaking those silos so that we can work on building this movement together and advancing the policies that we want to see for the lowest income renter. So I have a few of my friends here today, our partners that have been working with us for a while. I'll introduce them and then I'll talk a little bit more about the campaign and then we'll get into the panel. So I have with me Sarah Hashmer. She's with the National Women's Law Center. I have Auda Abando. She's with the American Academy of Pediatrics. I have Sam Washington. They're with the Civil Rights Course. And I have Hale Crumpley, and she's with Prosperity Indiana, which is our state partner. Thank you. So the Opportunity Starts at Home campaign launched in 2018, and really the idea behind our campaign was to build this multi-sector movement, bring in all these different voices to work on a federal housing policy. And so we do that in three ways. We have a steering committee. Our steering committee is really our governance board. These are 19 national groups that work with us very closely to build the movement. We meet with them quarterly, really talk about the strategies in the campaign. And then we have a roundtable that has over 100 national organizations. And with those groups, it's really just giving groups kind of like an entry point into housing advocacy. So maybe those groups can be fully mobilized. They already understand the sector, the impacts, the research that's out there. Or maybe they're just getting started into the work and they just want an entry point and then they can advance if they would like, or kind of just stay where they're comfortable. But it's our way of just creating a big table for folks to come in and join us however they would like to. And then we have state partners. We have 26 state partners now where we give them some support to do this work. So do the multi-sector work, and then they also use the partnerships that they're building to advance federal housing policy through the work. And so with over 100 advocates over the years, we have a little bit of a distinction from NLIHC. We have our own logo, our own website, opportunityhome.org. We have our own advocacy kind of tools for our advocates to use to send letters. And all of our letters will always be tailored with some type of multi-sector impact section there to kind of make us distinct from the other work that NLIHC is doing. For a long time, we've been kind of on the offensive work of the campaign, really talking about those really big buckets of funding, talking about expanding vouchers or increasing the housing supply or creating an emergency assistance fund for families. But this year, we're looking to pivot just a little bit into more of the defensive work because we've seen from our partners that this is something that they really do want us to pivot to, but I think it shows that with building these partnerships over the years that now we know our partners are strengthened to the point that they want to stand with us in defense. So when we're seeing things like budget cuts, they want to voice their concerns as well and how it impacts their sector to have those budget cuts in housing. Hi. Okay. Yeah. Come on in. Yeah. No? Yeah. So that's OSA. Myself and Mike Kaprowski, we work on this campaign together. And again, if you want more information on the campaign itself, you can go to opportunityhome.org. The other thing that we have on that website is fact sheets. So we have 15 fact sheets that we work with our national partners to put together. And that's the research that's out there around the campaign, around the sectors, how housing spills over to those sectors, all the research that's been really the significant ones have been collected throughout the years, because really the campaign is not building on a new message. The research has been out there. It's really just making sure we're building that coalition to do the work that has already been backed with substantial research for years and years and years. And so we'll jump into the panel and you'll stop hearing from me because I'm boring. And you'll hear from our panelists. So the first question I have for our panelists today is that the campaign we've been running for 5 years now, and we have, again, state we have steering committee members, we have roundtable members, we have state partners, over 100 partners that we've been working with throughout the years. And so just hearing from them about what we take back from the work, what have we been able to do together in the last 5 years? And we'll maybe just start down the line.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Great. So Sarah Hasmer, my pronouns are she, her, hers, and I started at the National Women's Law Center in September 2017 as a legal fellow. And over the past 5 years, I have grown to become the Director of Housing Justice. And like our housing justice portfolio has grown at NWLC, our engagement with Opportunity Starts at Home has also grown. We started in 2018 as one of the many roundtable members, and then the next year in 2019, we joined the steering committee, which has been very exciting to collaborate on a number of fronts, including action plans, sign-on letters. Our research team has been a great helping us give the data about gender and racial inequities that we can help add to sign-on letters. We've also been engaging, this is sort of newer, but NWLC has been a key player in the childcare arena. And so now we are trying to put more of an emphasis on the connections between housing and childcare. And we helped at least bring one childcare organization onto the roundtable. So we're happy to be part of the work. And while we did not get Build Back Better passed into law, we got it passed through the House. So I think that's a good accomplishment.
Yes, yeah. Thanks, Sarah.
Can you guys hear me? Okay. So again, I'm Dr. Aura Obando. It's a real pleasure to be here today. I'm an internist and a pediatrician and medical director of the family team at the Boston Healthcare for the Homeless program. I'm here today to speak on behalf of the American Academy of Pediatrics, or the AAP. The AAP is a nonprofit professional organization that represents 67,000 pediatricians in the US and internationally who are dedicated to promoting the health and well-being of all children. The AAP advocates for policies and programs that help ensure that children have access to the best access to health, mental health access, social supports, to ensure that they have the best chance of having well-being. The way we do this is by promoting policies and programs through peer-reviewed policy statements. And in 2013, the AAP published a policy called Providing Care for Children and Adolescents Facing Homelessness and Housing Insecurity. This was published in our Journal of Pediatrics and described the myriad ways that children are affected by homelessness in accessing healthcare, inadequate nutrition, educational interruptions, trauma, family dynamics, and more. Importantly, though, the policy also described and promoted for pediatricians to identify and address the health impacts of unstable housing, but to also advocate for the needs of homeless children by supporting local, state, and federal policies to include to promote for the increased availability of low-income, transitional, and permanent housing. So we took our own advice and became involved with the Opportunity Starts at Home campaign in 2019. And we've been grateful for the opportunities to weigh in on the importance of policies that support affordable housing. For instance, when the pandemic hit, pediatricians across the country spoke out about the importance of the eviction moratoriums and advocated for them to be continued so that our patients could remain stably housed. The AAP filed amicus briefs in court challenges outlining the importance of housing stability to child health, especially during a pandemic. We've also recently had the pleasure of working with the Opportunity Starts at Home campaign on a forthcoming paper that describes the impact of stable housing, housing instability, and homelessness on child and adolescent health. It also outlines the pediatrician's role in addressing housing instability in clinical practice, and again, promotes pediatrician advocacy for key policy interventions that address housing instability. And we're excited to continue partnering together and speaking out about the impact of housing instability on child health.
Thanks.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me all right? Yeah. Hi, I'm Sam Washington. I'm with Civil Rights Corps. Civil Rights Corps is a litigation and policy nonprofit in DC that does work around the criminal legal system. So on our litigation side, we primarily focus on cash bail, wealth-based detention, and conditions of confinement. But on our policy side, while we engage with that work as well, our primary focus is around building community safety outside of police and prisons. And so for a little over a year now, I think we're one of the newest entrants from this table to the round table. We've been working with the Opportunity Starts at Home campaign to make the case that we should be seeing affordable housing and housing generally as a safety issue. So our primary engagement has been, as I said, working with the roundtable and attending those meetings, sharing out information about sort of what is moving in the criminal legal space that is relevant to the affordable housing movement, but then also understanding what the priorities are of the experts in this space. And as part of our work, we have been leading a working group in which we uplift cross-sectoral investments in both the appropriations process and through legislation that we think will advance genuine community safety. And we have found the work of Opportunity Starts at Home and the National Income Housing Coalition more broadly to be really important for driving those priorities and ensuring that folks understand the connection that is seen both in the research and in the lived experience of folks between housing affordability and accessibility and safety in communities.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Hale Crumley, and I'm with Prosperity Indiana. So I'm actually one of those state partners. I'm not at the national level roundtable. And just a really quick thing, this is my first ever panel. So I'm going to be cheesy for just a second and take a picture of you guys if you want to smile for me. It's for LinkedIn, you know.
Oh, you're so cute.
Thank you. I appreciate that, guys. So Prosperity Indiana is the statewide association for community economic development organizations in Indiana. We have over 200 partners right now, and a lot of them are nonprofits, financial institutions, governmental entities, and we actually have a lot of individuals as well. And so Prosperity Indiana joined the Opportunity Starts at Home campaign back in 2019, so we are one of the earlier partners. And the way that connected to us is that one of the things that we offer to our members, but also just more broadly to Indiana, is advocacy, mostly on behalf of lower income Hoosiers for a variety of issues. So a lot of the work that we do in advocacy is actually through coalitions, statewide coalitions that anyone can join. And at first, it made sense for us to create an Opportunity Starts at Home specific coalition just for multi-sector partners who want to learn more about housing. However, as we grew and expanded our work both in state policy and federal policy, we realized that it actually made more sense to bring our normal housing coalition together with our multi-sector coalition. It benefited everyone. They all had things to learn from each other. So what we did is we merged those groups rather than keeping them separate. And this was really beneficial otherwise because we had all their multi-sector partners in the original housing coalition, such as AARP Indiana, multiple United Ways, and we wanted to make sure to recognize their efforts in the collective group. So now we intentionally bring all of our multi-sector partners in together, and this coalition, by the way, is called the Hoosier Housing Needs Coalition. I know it's a long name. I like to call it HHNC. We have a general membership of over 2,000, which is really exciting. Lots of advocates and practitioners. We also have a steering committee of approximately 18 very dedicated organizations from diverse areas of housing, affordable housing developers, homeless service providers, housing counseling, anything you can think of. And then for this campaign, we actually have a special dedicated team of 6 Opportunity Starts at Home partners. We call it the engagement team. And this group works on really special projects that they get lots of attention from me to make happen so that they can engage in housing when they're not normally used to it. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But in the last year alone, our statewide coalition has grown a lot because of this campaign and our multi-sector partners. So one example that I'll just share right now is something called the Court Watchers Toolkit. We'd actually learned this from a group in Texas, but it's really the idea of enabling anyone to go to their local, evictions court, their small claims court, and see the eviction crisis firsthand and make it accessible to literally anyone who wants to try. So I got together with a team of faith-based groups who were interested in trying this and several different law and housing connections that we had. And I created a 5-page document where anybody, you don't have to have any sort of degree at all, can read this, figure out how to go to their local claims court, watch it, and they can submit stories to us about the court cases they've seen. So not only were we getting some really interesting information, such as a lot of the eviction cases in Indiana are less than 5 minutes long, but we also really expanded our reach through this. We were able to reach people who don't consider themselves part of housing. And one of the biggest groups we were able to reach were faith groups. So not only did we solidify those ties with legal experts and bring them into our efforts, but we were able to create this new resource that can let anybody join the movement.
Thank you. Thank you all. You know, I really enjoy hearing from our partners, our national partners and our state partners, because what they really do is they enhance our work. So when we talk about making those connections and building those fact sheets and being able to talk to policymakers with the angle of not only being housing advocates, but having other people in the room to talk about why housing is so important to their own sector, we found that it really does just flip it a little bit, because for policymakers, maybe their top issue is education, maybe it's healthcare, whatever it is. But if we can have a speaker in that room that talks about how housing is foundational to what they do, it's not a nice thing to have, but really a necessity for their own organizations to progress, to achieve their vision and mission for themselves as well, that it really helps to create that bridge that I think you hear it in the stories of people with lived experience on how, you know, housing affordability impacts them on such a direct level. And you hear how it has educational impacts, healthcare impacts, equity impacts. It has impacts on transportation. It has impacts on how they can get food in their neighborhoods. But sometimes on the policy level, there seems to be that disconnect. And really, this campaign works to make sure that those things are connected when we're talking to policymakers, make sure those things are connected when we're putting out resources out there to help people bridge that space in their minds to the stories that we already know, but things that have been backed really by research, and have a voice with partners that know how to mobilize their own networks, because there's things that we don't know in the way to speak to other networks and get them all mobilized around our housing policy. But with these folks at the table with us, we can really help with the language that we use, help with the kind of advocacy strategies that we can use for our partners. So it really helps us to reach those spaces that may seem like it's unreachable to us as housers, because we have a particular language and we tend to be siloed in our sectors, but really helps to create that partnership in a way that's a deep partnership with our members and our partners over time, and really hearing the ways that they hear the way that we communicate and why it may not be as effective, and what we can do better is really transformational for us. And with our state partners, it's really amazing to see the work that they do, because they build those multi-sector coalitions at the state level, and then we give them a variety of ways that they can do it. So we see really creative ways that they're able to build partnerships, as you heard Hale mention, just really great ways that even us as a campaign at the national level we're maybe not able to tap into, but they are. And it's a way for those policymakers to hear from their constituents, a diverse voice in their constituents, that housing is foundational and it's needed and necessary and important. And so I just really enjoy when I hear from the partners, because they really do create that connection for us in that multi-sector space. And so one of the things I mentioned, and you can hear through our partners today, is that housing is important to what they do, but it's moving from having it as a nice to have, or like, oh, it's kind of related to like it's extremely necessary, and it's inextricably linked to everything. And so for them and for our partners that are sitting here, the question that I would pose to you all for the national partners, and I have a special question for Hale at the end, but really is, how does housing affordability really impact the communities that you serve, and what are the challenges that you see? And we can start down the line, or do you want to maybe start flip over, Sam?
Sure,
Yeah. Okay.
So in my day-to-day work, I provide shelter-based medical care to families and youth experiencing homelessness, and this is following a model of care called the Healthcare for the Homeless model. which understands that there's disparities in health outcomes between those that are housed and those that are not, and tries to break down barriers in accessing traditional care by being where our patients are rather than expecting them to come to a clinic or a hospital to access care. What this means for us is that on the ground in my day-to-day work, access to housing is the driver that pushes most of my patients into shelter and into my care, and is also the barrier that sometimes impedes their exit from shelter, leading to really prolonged shelter stays. We think of homelessness as a trauma in itself, and those prolonged shelter stays are almost a way of punishing poverty that perpetuates the traumas people are coming in with. It impacts chronic health conditions by causing barriers for folks to access their medical homes. And so it exacerbates things that might have been controlled previously, like asthma and diabetes. I live in an area where the cost of living is far outpaced the rate of minimum wage or childcare affordability. And so we have in Boston and in Massachusetts in general one of the highest rates of family homelessness in the country. So again, this is kind of directly impacting my day-to-day. I guess the punchline of all this is that safe and stable housing is foundational to child and adolescent health. So I see this trauma play out day to day in taking care of mothers with severe depression. Some come in with depression, and most are worsened in their depression during their shelter stay. I see it in children in congregate settings who are frequently exposed to the viruses that spread through the shelters like wildfire. Just yesterday in the shelter I was in, almost every child visit was a viral illness that's going through that shelter, and it's leading to all those parents missing work for days at a time while their children are ill, which again, these sort of things add up and impede that exit out of homelessness. Shelter settings don't allow for a lot of educational books or toys or really stimulation in general. So we also see an incredible amount of developmental delays and learning disabilities in our children that are at rates much higher than compared to housed children. So this is something we address in all our visits, even if the child is coming in with a virus or a bump or a cut, because we don't want children to fall further behind. We see a lot of disruptions in schooling, and higher rates of behavioral problems in children. Children who may not have the ability to express their distress by their situation often display it by acting out. So we call that behavioral problems. And so we see that pretty broadly in our population as well. And to thrive, families need a safe space to call their own, where their parenting won't be policed, where they can prepare culturally appropriate food, and where children can run, play, and be curious and just have that kind of normative childhood experience. In the youth population, I see a lot of intergenerational trauma. There's a high likelihood of having systems involvement like Child Protective Services or Department of Youth Services. And there's data in this population that low barrier access to housing early on in that experience of homelessness is can lead to more sustainable housing and better outcomes overall. So really like an early intervention model is best here, but there's very little housing stock that's accessible to unaccompanied youth. So addressing housing affordability would prevent the experience of homelessness in my patients, or at the least make it as brief as possible. And I kind of think about that this is one of the few settings where I think a lot of us in the room are working to put ourselves out of a job, which is kind of a weird thing to say, but I think all of us sort of are working in that kind of space. And this multifactorial or multisectorial approach is not just important at the policy level, but on the ground. So we often rely on our legal colleagues or school colleagues, our housing colleagues, obviously, shelter partners, to cohesively work together to make sure that whatever the outcome is for that family, it's as sustainable as possible.
Yeah.
Well, it's super exciting to hear you talking about the connections between public health and housing, because that is also definitely something that we focus on a lot. So as I said in my intro, I work at an organization called Civil Rights Corps, and the policy work that I do is primarily focused on community safety. And so that is a term, sort of a term of art, but also one that is, continuously being defined. But as we see it, community safety is what it looks like to have true safety in communities, and that is from a holistic perspective. So that is safety both from violence and harm, but also the safety to, breathe clean air and drink clean water, and crucially, the safety to have somewhere to lay your head at night. So that is sort of the primary way that I think of the intersection between safety and housing, that when we think about safety holistically and try to have a sense of what it actually takes to make a community safe, ensuring that folks are able to actually have a roof over their heads is sort of the first step in that process. But the other main overlap that I see between community safety and the work of affordable housing is just the wide swath of evidence that we have that connects housing affordability to reductions in violence and harm. So we see consistently that when new affordable housing units are created, when renters have access to vouchers, and otherwise folks are able to stay safely and stably housed, that area has large reductions in the rates of crime, especially violent crime, and that recidivism and rearrest rates go down as well. And we also see that particularly strongly, and we advocate significantly around supportive housing. So we've seen consistently that supportive housing, which creates wraparound services for folks with complex or high needs, we find that projects like that have really, really strong safety implications. So find that some of the folks who have most frequent interactions with police officers, with the justice system more generally, can really benefit from those types of wraparound services. And just having housing that is consistent and that meets their basic needs is able to actually often save government's money, because they tend to save on all those other social services, providing them outside of the wraparound services of supportive housing. So those are some of the main ways that we see our work overlapping. But again, this really is something where it's not just about, finding evidence that shows investing in affordable housing will reduce crime, but really about broadening what we mean by safety in the first place. And I'll talk about that a little bit more later, but I just think that is sort of the main point that I want to leave you with.
Thanks, Sam. Sarah?
So I am that panelist with slides. I'm a very visual person. So I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but we know that housing insecurity functions both as a result and a reinforcer of deeper social and economic inequities that have existed for centuries. It's a policy problem, not a personal failure. And of course, one of the structural issues is the housing supply. So, with many thanks for NLIHC's The Gap report, that helps demonstrate one of the issues. The largest supply gap is for housing that is affordable and available to extremely low-income renters. And so this is NLIHC's analysis of the 2021 supply gap issues. Our research team, in collaboration with NLIHC's research team, shared some methodology so that we were able to do this is 2019, one day hopefully we'll be able to update it. But this shows income distribution of single renters in 2019 by various demographics. And it probably surprises no one that single women of color and also single women of all races raising children on their own are more likely than white non-Hispanic men to have extremely low incomes. And so as we talk about that supply gap, it is most certainly a gender justice issue. And of course, we know that all of this, with the income disparities, a lot of that is because of our employment systems with gender and racial wage gaps. We also have women's overrepresentation in the low-paid workforce, which includes childcare providers who are the backbone of our economy but are often paid poverty wages. And of course, the list goes on. Here we go. And so given this housing security before the pandemic, we also have, here are the shares of severely cost burdened renters in 2019. And in our housing paper, The Roots of Discriminatory Housing Policy Moving Toward Gender Justice and Our Economy, we also have data for homeowners. So for those who work on both renter and homeowner issues, we have that too. Again, no surprise, but single women, particularly women of color and mothers raising children on their own, are roughly twice more likely than white non-Hispanic men to be spending the majority of their income on rent. And so with that setup from 2019, of course, COVID-19 hit. And of course, women of color in particular were disproportionately impacted because as we know, the starting place was already a lot of housing insecurity and it just worsened. And also women of color were more likely to lose employment income throughout the pandemic. Based on Census Pulse research, we found that data. And so this shows some analysis about behind on rent through 2021. And the purple line at the top, that is Black non-Hispanic women, continuously throughout the pandemic has been usually above 20% behind on rent. And we also know that historically, even before the pandemic, Black women faced higher rates of eviction than white women and white men. And second, the second line, teal, is Latinas. That's 2021 data. This is a slice of data from just November 2022, and emergency rental assistance has largely run out across the country. And this is a deeper slice, which actually continues to show Black non-Hispanic women disproportionately being behind on rent. But what's interesting is that our research team has also been able to analyze disability data so that we can also see higher rates for Black disabled women of color are higher too. That might be, yes. And so with this higher housing insecurity, we know that we need large investments, both on the supply side and in rental assistance. And one of the things that we're also trying to do more this year is expand tenant protections, such as the right to counsel and permanent stabilization funds. We think all of this policy and funding is definitely necessary.
Thanks, Sarah. Thank you. Hail, Prosperity Indiana. With the help of the support of the campaign, you've been able to really expand that multi-sector partnership in Indiana. So can you tell us how has the collaboration with those partners really helped your advocacy work?
Yes. So there are actually so many examples of this, and I'll try to be concise here. One of the really interesting things that have happened for us is the expansion of our involvement with faith groups. So that is one area that has really blossomed for us in the housing arena. And what started as a couple of interested church committees became really so much more. We've had the pleasure of co-hosting and presenting at more than a half dozen events in the last 6 to 8 months with these faith groups in central Indiana on housing issues in the state and how they can get involved at their request. So we've been telling them, how they can join our statewide housing coalition, and also about visiting the NLIHC Take Action page, and they have definitely been doing these things. In general, they've really jumped in since these initial engagements, which is very exciting, I think. They've been joining us for legislator meetings, participating in our organization's annual State House Day, where we take over our own little corner of the Capitol building. And then what I think is really, really exciting, and I like to brag about lately, is that a couple of these groups have actually come together and created their own organization called Housing Alliance Indy. And they're now looking right now about becoming an actual 501c3. So that is just really remarkable that, again, what started out as a couple of committees from churches that just had an interest in poverty and, what's going on with housing? I read evicted, has blossomed into this in such a short amount of time. And we've had the opportunity to facilitate that because of this campaign. So that's really powerful for us. Another big thing I'll mention that is a bunch of different examples is, again, our Opportunity Starts at Home engagement team, that team of 6 from multiple sectors that has just been really dedicated working on special projects with us. They have a bunch of interesting things going on that we've been able to help facilitate, all targeted at advocacy. So I'm just going to read off a couple that I think are neat I want to share with this group. We've got a brief, this is all in the next couple of months, by the way, a brief social media campaign in support of the Eviction Crisis Act and Family Stability and Opportunity Vouchers Act from the perspective of current and former foster youth. An op-ed in support of the Eviction Crisis Act co-written by law experts and maternal health experts in Indiana, and a sign-on letter from faith leadership all across Indiana calling for more funding for housing, not less. So really exciting things that I just want to emphasize. These were the ideas of our engagement team partners, people who don't consider themselves to work in housing. These were their ideas, and all they really needed was a little extra help from me. So I'm really excited to be facilitating all these special projects. And another great example I will say about these multi-sector partners furthering our advocacy is that we have all 6 of our engagement team members joining us for NLIHC's Hill Day on Thursday for several meetings, and 2 are in person here even. So very exciting.
Yes, really, really exciting. I want to highlight a few things, especially if it feels like I've got a lot of information here. Maybe is there a way for me to get it afterwards? We'll have a few to share from the folks here that we'll share out after the forum, but also just in general, if you go to our website and you click on that sector page for the fact sheets, but you can also click on the resource page, and that's where we have just anything we ever do. So any articles that go out with our partners, any press releases, any videos, anything that comes out from us, you'll find it on our resource page. We also have a podcast. So if you go to Apple or you go to SoundCloud, you just type in Opportunity Starts at Home. And we have a podcast where we sit down with experts and just dive deeper into some of these topics. A few of our partners have actually collaborated with us on the podcast. So definitely check that out. I think we have like 40 episodes now. We just keep releasing them. We have articles that we collaborate on. And if you want to know more about our state campaigns, they each have a page on our website. So you'll go to a little tab that says like partners, and you'll see state partners, and you'll click on one. And then if you want to know what our state campaigns are doing, we just list them out as they send them to us. So any letters that you hear, any cool things that you hear our state partners do, you could find that as well. And then any latest updates on the campaign you can just find by looking at our newsletter, and we just send one newsletter out every month. And to sign up for that, you just go on our website and there's a newsletter sign up, and that way you can stay updated on the campaign happenings, but also we collect the research that's out there. So anything new that comes out, we try to just stay on top of it so that we can share it with you all as well. So just wanted to throw that out there because I know it could be like, oh, there's all these cool things. Where do I find it? And you can find it. So definitely check those things out. And for the last question that I have until we'll open it up for Q&A, so just get those questions prepared if you have any for the panelists. But the last question I have for you all is a really big question, which is if you can leave the audience with any last words, any major takeaways, any lessons learned, any research that you think is compelling, success stories, a really broad question here, but what would it be? And maybe we can start with Sam.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, so I think I would just like to leave folks with really a call and I don't know, a pitch perhaps to really try to think about the ways that you can use community safety, public safety, however you want to frame it, to advance housing priorities. And I think there's really 2 elements to that. And so one is just the fact that, like, practically, I have found that this sort of messaging around how affordable housing can be used for safety can be incredibly effective, especially on the local level. We're constantly getting, incoming from mayors, from city councils saying that this, issue of public safety is crucially important to them. And, you'll try to have meetings with them about other things, and they're like, we're getting blasted on this. And so I think the fact that there is such strong evidence that we know that shows that these investments will have a strong impact on this thing that so many lawmakers are, very, very attentive to is, I think, a really important thing for advocates who are working in the housing space to know that there is, this one other sort of tool in your toolkit that you can use to advocate for these investments. But I think also, on the other hand, just sort of on a somewhat more lofty, abstract level, but I think no less important. In the criminal justice space, we often say that we're the canaries in the coal mine. So there is a sense that, the attacks that we're seeing in our space are really foreshadowing the attacks that other folks will see on other progressive issues. And I definitely don't have to tell folks in this room that, the canary has been singing. I think we all know that there are real risks, but I think ultimately coming together around the idea that there's no one in our communities who are disposable, and that, as you were saying, that, sort of these issues that we are seeing are systemic issues and that we can't push them onto individuals. That is something that is so important in the criminal justice space and when we're trying to build safety, and I know is also incredibly important to all of you. So just to the extent that you, are interested in lifting up these messages, as Chantel said, we have plenty of resources we'd be happy to share showing, the polling connecting these issues, the research connecting these issues, and some of the rhetorical strategies that we have found the most effective. So if anyone is interested in getting in touch, I'll be around after the panel.
Thanks, Sam. Sarah, you want to jump in?
Sure. So, one clear thing, which actually Matthew Desmond stole my thunder, but I have the talking point here. One key thing: there's no one right way to do something, but as he said, there are clearly wrong ways to do something. I think emergency rental assistance is a prime example about how it is so critically important to be flexible. Different people have different situations, and so our housing policies and procedures need to be responsive to individual needs. There is no one-size-fits-all box. Also, during the pandemic, I have been pleased to see how much power tenants have with speaking out, and I hope that that continues and that hopefully it will become easier for tenants to organize. Even at my apartment complex, we are thinking about organizing, so very excited for that. And lastly, as I mentioned earlier, we have been a leader in the childcare space for a while, and I was very happy to have a panel at our childcare advocates meeting in January talking about the connection between housing and childcare. And one of the commonalities was they said, well, here we are in our childcare space, and we're having a hard time getting done the work that we need to do to get the childcare investments we need. We also had a whole bunch of, we had several home-based childcare providers sharing their stories about issues from zoning to needing to having to install a sprinkler system or facing eviction after eviction and having to literally go through 150 landlords to try to find a landlord that will let them operate a childcare business out of their home. And so they recognized we can't do it alone. As Chantal said, like housers, we know we can't do it alone either. So it's really important for us to make these connections because we are stronger together. And it's going to be a tough year this year with the debt ceiling, but together we know that we can fight and oppose the terrible cuts to housing. And also what's very important is that because NWLC is a multi-issue organization, we can help hold the line so that programs are not pitted against each other, because that is often what happens in austerity climates. And so we can try to hold the line with childcare, but also with housing and nutrition assistance, et cetera.
Yes, thank you. And our partners help us with that too, just making sure that when we're putting out the communication, even though Opportunity Starts at Home is focused on affordable housing policy, that we're not doing that, making sure that we're not communicating at all that we want to see cuts in other areas, that they all matter and are very, very much important. And we get flagged by our partners all the time about the kind of language that we use, and just making sure that that message is clear to policymakers, that what we're really asking for is just a collaboration amongst the issues that we do have, and just that this coalition is focused on housing, but that they all really do matter. And so let me throw it over. Hale, are you ready for that last question? Okay, you can take it away.
Yeah, no problem. So I think my advice, really, my major takeaway from our work with the campaign is obviously directed towards organizations that work in housing, that are interested in engaging people who don't consider themselves to work in housing, but could be very valuable partners. So, just to preface this really quick, I did want to list some of those organizations on our engagement team so people understand the diversity of the groups that we have found success working with to show that it is possible. So, we have the Greater Indianapolis Multi-Faith Alliance, Foster Success, Indiana Justice Project, CareSource Indiana, Grassroots Maternal Child Health Initiative, Indiana Association for Area Agencies on Aging. And then, like I said, we were already having these very deep partnerships with AARP, multiple United Ways, and a couple of other individual churches. So just keep that in mind. But my major takeaway really is that anyone can be a multi-sector partner. The most important part is to meet them where they're at. And that is something that not everyone has liberty to do because that requires, staffing capacity and sometimes that grant money. But I think this is something that this amazing campaign allows us to do. And if you're able, it's really worth your time. I think we've entered a point in the world where everyone is aware that housing impacts their clients, their constituents, and so on. It's just whether or not they're ready to engage on that. I think, though, we have reached a consensus point where people understand that is true. And, some people are ready to engage and some aren't, but the ones that are really going to rise to the top as your potential champions in that sector. And that's what I've done with the engagement team is I've tried to identify the people who have risen to the top as potential champions. And I think that if you provide these potential champions with time, flexibility, education, they're going to participate with a lot of energy. You just have to help them and facilitate that process. But there are people out there who are ready, even though they do not consider themselves a housing organization. And they all have different needs too. I've found that my faith-based partners are really interested in face-to-face engagement and that sort of moral argument for housing. And that is very important to them. That is how they want to operate. And I can totally work with that. I've also found that my health partners and my law partners, they're very interested in kind of the structural cause, and they want to engage in these more academic ways they can write down. I can work with that too. We can find stuff to do together. And then even, there are a lot of partners out there who are in other sectors and they don't really feel ready to do any lobbying yet. There are some ways that you can get really creative so that what they do is advocacy and you can tie the bow that is lobbying through your organization. So really there are options, and it's just so important to meet them where they're at in order to get them to engage. I think anyone can be a partner.
Thanks, Hale. And lastly but not least, Helga.
So I have 3 takeaway points. One, again, kind of echoing what my co-panelists have mentioned, is to think about healthcare as a potential ally in your policy and advocacy work. In thinking about what we need to achieve to ensure that all children achieve their best potential, we have to address all social drivers of health, and of course that includes housing. And that the aphorism "housing is health" holds as true for adults as it does for children. There's ample data, as I mentioned in my last answer, that homelessness and housing instability leads to poor health outcomes. And there's less data of the converse, that safe and stable housing leads to better health outcomes. But what is out there is suggestive and positive. We do know that some of the detrimental health effects of homelessness and housing instability are reversible. And so I like to always finish on that positive note because I feel often like a Debbie Downer listing all the bad outcomes. But we do know, for instance, with the behavioral problems I mentioned in children, once children achieve safe and stable housing, a lot of those behavioral problems can be reversed. And so I think these kind of nuggets are important to mention in that advocacy work. It gives us a reason to unite around kind of a future-oriented, hopeful approach to give yet another reason for providing safe and stable housing. The second point is that in thinking about the drivers of homelessness and housing instability, those have to be addressed to ensure stable outcomes down the road. And this might mean tapping into medical and health supports for those of you that are housers that are working on the ground. So thinking about reaching out to your medical colleagues, and this might mean tapping into your local federally qualified health center or going on the National Healthcare for the Homeless Council website and putting in your zip code and finding out who's doing this work on the ground. Your medical colleagues can be incredibly impactful in ensuring stability in housing by helping obtain accommodations for folks who need them, providing documentation that might help someone more successfully apply for things like SSI or other disability supports that might be the critical source of financial stability for those with barriers to sustaining employment. So tap into those colleagues who are eager to help. The third and final point is thinking about the multi-generational aspect of housing instability and homelessness. So for some time now, we've been talking about something called ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences. These are negative exposures in childhood that include a number of things. I'll just list a few: maternal depression, substance use, exposure to violence, childhood abuse, and homelessness. And these are linked with poor health and behavioral outcomes down the road later in life. Some of those health outcomes might include higher risk of developing chronic illness such as heart disease and diabetes, higher chance of developing substance use in adulthood, mental health problems, and adult homelessness. So this is an example of homelessness begetting homelessness. The more ACEs a child is exposed to, the higher the risk of those downstream outcomes. So in thinking about housing, I urge us not to think about the short-term impact of the family or individual being served, but about the long-term effects, and seeing housing as an investment that reaps immediate as well as downstream benefits for individual and family health. You're more the policy and budget experts than I am, and I know it's a hard ask to ask politicians to consider something beyond this year's bottom line and to look 20 years down the road. But I do know that increasing access to affordable housing can prevent ACEs in some children and build resilience in those who've already been exposed to ACEs. By investing in housing in children today, we invest in the future of a healthier, more productive adulthood that are less likely to find themselves homeless once more again in their lifetimes. And this, as I mentioned, translates to better health outcomes overall.
Thank you. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you. Okay, I'm curious. Do we have any questions? One second.
Oh, thank you. Hi. My name is working. Okay. My name is Calandria, and I am from the New Jersey Coalition to End Domestic Violence. I am the policy coordinator, and today I'm here with the director of housing. And I was like hoping at some point that in any of you have worked with domestic violence provider in your state. One of the reasons to homelessness is domestic violence, and on top of domestic violence is one of the many intersections issues that domestic violence face. And so us in the New Jersey Coalition to End Domestic Violence, we have created partnership with New Jersey Share Fair Housing, and also with the housing community development, because we see that access to housing first is safety for survivors. And as many of you mentioned, safety, and that is what prevents survivors to go back to the person who caused harm. So I would like to know if any of you have connected with your domestic violence providers, and if not, if it's worth to reach out to them to see how all of you can work collaboratively to help survivors find accessing housing. Thank you.
If I could. So actually, our statewide Hoosier Housing Needs Coalition, on that steering committee, I said there's about 18 organizations. I know I'm kind of short. The Indiana Coalition Against Domestic Violence is one of our strongest partners on that steering committee. In fact, they've become so involved with our housing work that they were one of our main distributors for emergency rental assistance funds. They brought on staff to do that and become one of the housing counseling providers. So they are really a wonderful partner, and I agree. It's just so important to bring them in. Safety is exactly the talking point that they use as well, and they come to the State House with us all the time to have these important meetings and discuss this intersection, because they can't do their work. You can't do your work without housing. So I just want to say I appreciate that, and definitely we are doing that in Indiana.
And at the national level, National Women's Law Center, we collaborate with a number of domestic violence organizations, for example. And just because I am a commenting nerd, so to speak, I'm going to put out a plug. There is this wonky thing, proposed rule that is out from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development called Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing, known as AFFH. And the comment period goes through April 10th. And one of the important things that we are trying to do is add more of the gender aspect so that we can promote. This applies to, because the government was so involved in housing discrimination, not only does the Fair Housing Act ban discrimination based on protected classes, but also entities receiving HUD funding must take actions to affirmatively further fair housing. And so one thing that you can do in your community, they're seeking comments about how folks can engage in community engagement and what would make it easier for impacted folks to contribute. And so one thing that I encourage, even if it's just a couple paragraphs telling HUD what localities can do so that more domestic violence providers, but also survivors, can share what obstacles they are facing to accessing fair housing. Because as you said, we know that lack of access to affordable housing too often keeps a survivor with the abuser, but also we know that single-sex shelters are not perfect. And so if there are kids, that's also a concern. And as the pandemic has shown, congregate shelters just are not the safest environment. So housing first, definitely promote that, and definitely comment and get engaged in your local community.
I don't know. Hey, yeah, no. At Civil Rights Corps, we've worked with several, primarily survivors groups, and trying to talk to them about sort of what safety solutions they think are most important. And we found that housing has come up consistently. So when we have put together reports with survivors groups, the emphasis has been on trying to think about what sorts of like affirmative investments they need to be proactively safe, rather than trying to respond to violence and harm after it's already occurred. So that is sort of the primary way that we have worked with them.
I was just going to say that this is definitely a critical issue for us on the ground, as domestic violence, unfortunately, is one of the larger drivers of family homelessness. So we work very closely taking care of the health and mental health needs of the entire family, working closely with our legal colleagues, immigration attorneys, majorly rely on our behavioral health team to support families through these traumas. And at a more policy level, the AAP does have a policy statement that encourages pediatricians to screen for domestic violence and address it as a critical driver of child health as well.
Thanks. Any additional questions?
Hello, everyone. I'm Casey Ensign. I work with Metro Nashville's housing division, and I think this is a question mostly for Haley. Did I say her name?
Hale.
Hale? Okay, sorry about that.
No problem.
I was just curious, for those organizations that, were interested but maybe not ready to truly lobby or advocate, what strategies were most effective for getting them to that point where they were, comfortable to actually lobby?
Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, I have a couple of partners who are still not at that point, and I've found ways to work with that, and it is really about getting creative. So if anyone else experiences this, I also have a plug, Boulder Advocacy. They are like a national project. Their whole thing is about providing advocacy and lobbying advice to nonprofits, and they have a hotline. They're incredible. They'll come do free presentations to your organization. I love them. But essentially what they, cued me in on is that you can get creative in a number of ways, such as I have one partner, it's a very close partner, that feel they cannot engage in lobbying, not because they're not allowed to, but because they happen to have a very large state-funded grant, which is a really exciting thing, but they are not willing to jeopardize that. So the arrangement that we have is that I am on their steering committee. I get early access to a lot of their data, and they always are sure to send me any relevant clips, for interviews that they have, special quotes, special data. And what I do is, let's say they tweet it on their official account and it gets this much attention. And then I will retweet it on my account and I will tag legislators. So then I am the one doing that lobbying, but what they're producing still gets to their attention. So anytime this group produces a report, I will print those reports and personally hand them to legislators the next time I go to the State House. And then I'm the one doing the lobbying, and they are just educating at best. And even, really, I'm taking their content, but they're allowing me to, and we have that special arrangement. So I think there are a lot of opportunities to get creative. And if anybody has a particular issue where they're not sure how to work around something, I'd be happy to brainstorm with you. I have a lot of different groups that have very specific circumstances that I've had to navigate.
Thanks, Hale. Another question.
Thanks. Susanna Parsons with All Home from California. Such a fantastic panel. Thank you so much. I had a follow-up question. I was hoping the panel could maybe speak in more detail to a point that was made earlier about keeping a large multi-sector campaign together, and maybe particularly in our current context where we're facing austerity, but certainly not only in that context. I think there's often a sense that policy changes are a zero-sum game, and how to keep folks together, focused both on housing issues, but also on their core issues. What are practical advice that you have or a perspective that you can offer about how to keep a large, diverse, multi-sector campaign together?
Any answers from the panel? So I could jump in.
So I guess I can start with one of the things that NWLC tries to do is get out talking points and other messaging to counter austerity messaging. And one of the wonky things, I say that housing is connected to everything because it is, yes. Also, tax is connected to everything. And so the more we can get organizations interested in taxes and revenue and raising and taxing, making the rich and big corporations pay their fair share, helps us communicate the message that, yes, there is room for investments in housing, in childcare, in nutrition. We don't have to pit these programs against each other or pit, for example, U.S. citizens against undocumented immigrants, as another example. And so I think the more we can keep that unifying message, and just as women don't lead single issue lives, organizations should recognize that there are these intersections, and it is not a zero-sum game. We can get the advancements that we need, but only if we stick together. And we encountered some of those issues in the Trump administration and this year with the debt ceiling. I am hopeful that we can fend off those drastic cuts that certain folks over there are proposing.
Yeah, and one thing that I will add is, with Opportunity Starts at Home, once Build Back Better came into the picture, we thought, well, maybe our partners wouldn't be so, because there were so many things on the table, so maybe they were going to be more robust in their own advocacy for their own areas. But what we found is that it was when we had the most sign-ons to our letters, that they were just as energized, if not more, on having all these investments in front of us and wanting to push forth the things that we really committed to through the campaign, which was kind of a surprise to us because, again, we thought, oh, wait, maybe they back off. But if anything, they put more effort out there for the work that we're doing with Opportunity Starts at Home. And I do think a big piece of that we also talk about a lot through the campaign is that we do have a capacity in the campaign, as there are 2 staff members that work on it. That's like our bread, that's our job to do. So we do lend a hand to our partners in terms of when we do the ask, we're the ones drafting the letters first and saying, hey, look at this and let us know if there's anything that we need to change, or here are the meetings that we're setting up. And the policy team sets up the schedule, and we just say, hey, if you're available on this date, we can really use your voice in this meeting. And so capacity is really a big part of it. But I think that also having that deep kind of like commitment in the organizations that this is really important to the work that they also do has been something that we're able to continue to go back to when we're talking to our partners. And sometimes it fluctuates because there's turnover and there's change in environments and all those things. But we've been trying to work through it and overcoming those changes and always being able to pull our partners back because we've really committed in like this very, I think with a campaign is such a very specific thing. We're broadening affordable housing. We're doing it in a very broad way, in a way that we can get your members to also understand in a very, very broad way to do it. But again, we've seen that over the years, because we've deepened those relationships, we were able to really push our partners to, they were ready. They were ready more than we thought they would be for the moment, and ready now, as we've talked about defensive work, that they're with us saying, no, we need to jump in at this time as a campaign, as a multi-sector campaign to work on this. So just wanted to add that. Was there anything that you guys wanted to add there? Or
I have something to add. I think it's important to also really emphasize the two-way street of this relationship.
Yeah.
So, it's not just I need you to come to all my housing events because I want multi-sector partners there. I'm also going to come to your event because housing is still relevant to your organization. And I think a really good example of this, actually, it's too bad I don't see her in the room, but one of our partners, that I said is here in person, is from Foster Success. It's our statewide foster youth and former foster youth supportive organization. And they actually just got a line item in our budget, huge win that they weren't really expecting for, supportive emergency services and things like that. And, what they weren't expecting it to move so quickly, and they knew, Hale and Andrew, they are the housing people. And so they felt that they could call us and that we would immediately come help them and provide data that they needed to make this happen. So, yes, I want them to be available to me when we need this multi-sector support, but I am also very, very available to them when they need somebody to speak about housing, which they often do because, again, housing impacts everything. So just kind of making myself known as the housing person. If you need something about housing, give me a call. I will send you a PowerPoint. I will come give the PowerPoint presentation. I think that's been really helpful, making it a two-way like that.
Yep, absolutely. And I saw, yeah.
Advocating for communities, specifically for community who has been marginalized, has been, well, we all know. So working together is kind of working toward the value of the organization that we work, regardless if it's in housing, health, education. So kind of that fight among, together, I think is what is gonna get the ultimate goal for all organizations. Like that's.
Sorry, you're good. Thank you for that. Thank you. And just one more question, and then we can wrap up.
Hi, my name's Max. I'm from Metro Detroit, and I work for a homelessness and housing agency. And I think my question is actually directed to you that at least on the website, I don't see Michigan listed as one of the states. And right now we have for the first time in probably 30 years, almost my entire life, that we actually have a supportive state legislature, a supportive governor who are aggressive and are willing to kind of make policy changes. I'm curious what we can do to be able to, what's the process like to be able to add a state as onto this project, and kind of what that looks like in terms of, sounds like from Indiana's perspective that there is some stuff that's actually being able to, that we can start implementing on that.
Right. Well, we do it as much as we can get funding to do it. So we do fund. We've done it in cohorts. But we fund the state campaigns. And so what would happen is that we'd see if we have funding available, and if we have funding available, we kind of go to our policy team and our field team at NLIC, and we ask them about recommendations, and that kind of it breaks down to a number of things. It's just like, what does the Congress look like? What's the racial equity work that they're doing? What's the overall housing affordability issue and the work that they've been doing, as well as if we have a strong partner as well that's like, you don't necessarily have to have a multi-sector coalition to join Opportunity Starts at Home, but just knowing that like the makings of the work is there, that like there's maybe some conversations with different partners already and that work is kind of happening. And so I want to say it was 2019. We put out an RFP for applications. And so we kind of went through that process and we've been working, kind of looking still at those applications, but then also getting the backing from our policy and field team. And so we want to have a state partner in every single state. So every time we do get the opportunity to get funding, we do start that conversation all over again on how we can, who we can fund, who should be at the table, what is our most active state partners, what are they doing, how can they be a part of the multi-sector coalition. We did have an endorsement process maybe 2 years into the campaign where we had groups come in and they were kind of already doing the multi-sector work and they just kind of wanted to be brought in somehow in the campaign. We haven't done that in a while. It's not even necessarily because it just has been something that's just, we've had it and it kind of just fell off somewhere. But we still do have that process in line as well as a way to bring in state partners. So our intention is to, as much as we get funding, to just throw that funding right back out there. And that's the process in which we find our partners. So yeah, and hopefully one day soon we get Michigan. Yeah. Any other questions? Are you ready for your refreshments? All right, that sounds about right. But thank you so much.